I'm so happy that Dr. Chandra has been doing this series, and it's my really great pleasure to be asked to introduce our speaker today. I've known Helen Raizen socially for quite a while now, and through our involvement in a couple of different social justice organizations. And then at some point I discovered that she and I had some overlapping scientific interests as well. So that kind of made it even more cool. And now I've come to actually know quite a bit more about her very impressive career. Helen spent 40 years working as an implementer, designer, and software architect with expertise in things that I could tell you about, but I wouldn't know really what I was saying. So I'll let her pick and choose the details of what she wants to share. But she has experience with a vast array of different types of computer systems and memory architectures and ways of measuring and evaluating performance and handling data security. She has experience as a technical and project leader, so I'm sure she can talk about the soft skills as well as the technical skills of what she's done. She, in 2009, was named a Distinguished Engineer at EMC Corporation. She's a leader in innovation with 60 US patents and 2 innovation awards. She is now retired and using her 4 decades of experience to encourage and support women in STEM and also to advise social enterprises on software use. And it sounds like some of her projects actually do both of those at once. So yeah, again, it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome her here virtually, at least to UMass Lowell.
Okay, I'm just going to bring my slide deck up here. And let's put this on slideshow. Okay. So I'm going to talk about navigating around career roadblocks. The talk is basically to share my experiences as a software engineer. And I mostly worked at private corporations. And I'm going to tell you, first of all, life is going to throw roadblocks in your way. These roadblocks can come from within yourself. They can come from circumstances that are completely outside your control, or even from unconscious biases in society. But in every case, you need to recognize that there's a roadblock, try to understand it, and then figure out how to get around it or over it and move on. And my experiences can be summed up in 3 lessons that I want to share with you today. And the first one is don't limit yourself. The second is embrace failure. And don't think about failure as negative, but think about it as mistakes that you learn from. And the third is ask for what you want. And I'm going to talk about each of these points by illustrating stories from my own experience and career. So don't limit yourself. Don't say, in your own head, you might say, I can't do X because I'm Y. So in my example, I thought I would never be a manager. And I thought I couldn't be a manager because I didn't really have good people skills. And I also didn't want to write reviews. And then I was at my first big company. I'd been there a while, and we were in a class that was called efficacy training for women, where we were challenged to think about things differently. And one of the things they challenged us to think about was if we were limiting ourselves. And I started to think about it and say, well, I wonder if maybe I could be a manager. Maybe my self-assessment isn't really correct. Maybe this is something I could do, and I do have some skills that managers need, like I'm good at organizing things, and I actually really like people, and I like helping people. And so maybe it's something that I could do. And then at some point in my career, so I opened myself up to it, and it didn't happen right away, but there was a point for about 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years in my career when I was a manager. I was very successful at it. And one of my, many of the people who reported to me felt like I had really helped them. And in fact, I discovered that and don't take this the wrong way, but I kind of felt like the people who reported to me were kind of like my children. I cared for them. I was there to help them. I was there to enable them. And I paid a lot of attention to, for instance, development opportunities and things like that. And I was a pretty good manager. I stopped being a manager at a certain point, but that's a different story. So here's another story. At one point in my career, well, let me start this way. I think I've always thought it's very important to acknowledge that the work we do is jointly with other people. A lot of it's done in teams. And so I like to describe what I've done, saying we did this and we did that. And I went to interview for a job. It was a research position. I was kind of excited about maybe getting a little bit away from pure product development and into something more researchy. And I flew all the way across the country to interview for this job. And I didn't get it. And the feedback I got was that they weren't sure if I had done the research or somebody else had, because I was talking about everything with we. So I registered that. I started being a little more, I did this and I did that. And this later came back to bite me at the very end of my career when I had been laid off from what was then Dell. EMC was taken over by Dell. And I was applying for the very last job I could find in the company to try to stay there. And I was actually really, really well qualified for this job. But I don't think they wanted me for reasons that were maybe not legal. And they looked at my resume and they said, there's no record here of collaboration, because I had changed everything to I. And the job was actually a job that was going to help connect the technology office with the product offices. And I had been working with all these different product offices over the course of almost 20 years at that point. And so this assessment that they used to turn me down for the job was completely false. But so don't limit yourself, but you have to like also walk the right line between the I and the we. At a certain point in my career, after I became a distinguished engineer, I actually got a coach from the company, and she taught me about what she called physical, intellectual, and emotional wake, the 3 wakes. If you think about a boat going through water, wake is what is left behind the boat, and you're having an impact on other people, both from a physical point of view, an emotional point of view, and a technical point of view. And what she worked on me a little bit around, physically presenting myself, but mostly I was very good technically. And what I needed to work on was the emotional wake. And I learned from her that I could make changes and I could improve the impact I had on other people. She taught me self-awareness leads to self-management. And this was a very important lesson. Now, at a slightly later point after that, I was in a really difficult situation, and I'll tell you another story from this situation under another one of the topics. But I was in a situation where I was working on a team that I had been assigned to, and there was some, I think, how should I put this? People didn't necessarily want me there. It sounds kind of weird, but so what happened, the actual thing that happened was there was a guy in this group who was a manager. He was not who I reported to. He was my peer. We both reported to the same manager. And I was given an assignment by my manager, and I started to work on it. And I went off on vacation, a scheduled vacation. When I came back from vacation, the little spreadsheet that said who was doing what, my name had been removed and 2 other names had been put in there. There was no other communication about this. There was no memo or email, or we decided to reallocate this or anything. It was just this extremely passive aggressive, if you will, change in what was on the spreadsheet. So of course I was annoyed, but I had learned not to show that kind of annoyance at that point. But I wrote an email to my manager saying I was very surprised by this, and what was going on. And he didn't really respond except when we were meeting face to face. And when we met face to face, he basically said, oh, this guy, he is the way he is. He's never going to change. You just have to put up with it. And I didn't really agree with that, but I didn't want to argue with my manager. So what I did instead was I said, look, I understand what you're saying. I just want you to know that if I ever do something that is bad behavior or is hurtful to other people, I want to know about it so I can fix it and so I can change. And I do believe that I didn't say that people can change. He was wrong about that. I just told him that I could change. So that was my way of handling that situation. So let's see here. I'm going to move on to embracing failure. So you want to learn from your mistakes and you want to not repeat them. So I'm going to go back to pretty early in my career. I was working in an operating systems group at a place called Prime Computer, which maybe some of you have heard of, but it was a very big tech company in Massachusetts, along with places like Digital and Wang, none of which exist anymore. And by the way, I actually like to say this at the beginning of my talk, but every place I ever worked, except for the very last place, no longer exists. So this is part of the way the industry is. So anyway, I was working at Prime Computer. I was in the operating system group, and we had chosen a new language, which was called Modula 2, which was a very structured language that was popular kind of for a very small time. But we had chosen this language to use to implement our operating system. We were going to switch from the older language to this one, and the whole company had agreed to this strategy, and the compiler group worked on a compiler. And I was so enthusiastic about Modula 2 that I said, I'm going to do my project that I was doing. I was adding some new features to the operating system, and I'm going to do that in Modula 2, even though that meant that before I could find and fix my bugs, I had to find the compiler bugs and get the compiler team to fix those. So it was very challenging, but I was successful. And I did feel like, because of the very structured language that Modula 2 was, it saved me time, even with that extra time to find the compiler bugs. However, here's what happened. I was about to go out on maternity leave. I'd finished this project, and somebody asked me, how many lines of code do we have in Modula 2 in the operating system? And I thought it was a weird question, but I just answered it. And then I went out on maternity leave for 4 months. And when I came back, Modula 2 had been canceled. And what I learned from that was, when people ask you weird off-the-wall questions, you should ask them why they're asking that question. Because if I had known that they were thinking about canceling Modula 2, I could have told them all the things that were good about it, all the time that it saved me, why it was valuable, even though we were just starting to use it in the operating system. It might not have changed the decision, but at least the decision would have been more informed than, well, we can't support this compiler and we only have a few lines of code in it, so we're just going to ditch it. And that lesson of when people ask you an off-the-wall question, or even ask you just any random question, asking why are you asking this? Why do you need, not in a challenging way, but I'm curious why this is important to you, and getting underneath it is very important. Yeah, the very first job that I chose out of grad school, I was trying to stay in Wisconsin. I got my master's in computer science in Madison, Wisconsin. There weren't really any tech jobs in Wisconsin then, so I took a job at a place called the Physical Sciences Laboratory, which was run by the physics department, and they had several computers there, and they were selling some time sharing. They were doing a lot of different things. And almost as soon as I got to that job, I realized that I was underemployed, and it wasn't going to be a job that really used what I had learned in my computer science career. But I decided to stick it out for a year. I started to make a plan to move. I picked a place where there were tech jobs, which was Boston. I actually ended up interviewing both at Prime Computer and Wang in Lowell. So I almost ended up working in Lowell. But I was working, I was doing the job, I was committed to putting a year in so my resume wouldn't look like I was just jumping around, and taking that year to get what I could out of that job. And I did learn some very useful things while I was on that job, but also to move myself to where I would be more employed with what I had to offer as with a master's in computer science. And when I went to the physicist who ran this place and told him that I was leaving to go to Prime Computer, he said, "Oh, I didn't know they had a sales office in Madison." He didn't even recognize that my competency as an engineer. And it was kind of really interesting. But anyway, so another experience with failure. There was a point in my career when I had a child who was sick and missing school, and there were multiple things going on which we totally didn't understand what was going on. And I kept missing work, and I was on a project, and I got about a month behind on my project because for a month we just didn't know what was going to happen from one day to the next. And then my partner and I sat down and made a schedule, and we said, okay, we have to be fairer to our employers, and I'm going to cover these days, and you're going to cover those days. And I went to the employer and I said, I need to be able to take off one day a week for family medical leave, and because I need to cover this day, and we're trying to figure out what's going on, and I'm going to get back on track on this project, but it's about 4 weeks late. And my boss said the sort of typical things that people say in companies: "Oh, don't worry about it, take care of your family, everything's okay." And my partner, by the way, was working part-time and wasn't protected by the Family and Medical Leave Act, and lost her job. But that's sort of an aside. What actually happened to me was I got a really bad review a few months later, with a highlighting that I had missed the schedule without any acknowledgement that I'd had this sick child, or that I made up for it. And this is an example where I really want to encourage you, when you reach something like this, when things are going not well, you have to think about, what do you want to do? Do you want to ride through this? Do you want to leave? There was actually some political things going on, which I later came to understand. I had a colleague who were working very closely together who also got a bad review for different supposed reasons, but it was really the politics was affecting both of us. And he decided to leave. He went off and found another job. But I still had a kid that had a lot of needs, and it wasn't a good time for me to find another job. So I decided to stay. And I was a little worried about how this bad review was going to impact me, but in the long run, it didn't impact me at all. It kind of disappeared. So, and that may be because it was political and not real. So again, when you face a situation like this, you really need to think about, what do you need to do? and how, what's going to move forward for you. And really, things usually improve if you decide to write it through. And if they don't, you still have the option of leaving later. And actually, that kind of brings me to the next story, which is I was laid off in my career 4 times, 3 times in the 90s. I don't know what that says about the 90s, because I think maybe it was just my history. I definitely, after the first layoff, the first time, we had just had our second child, and I was trying to stay where I was so I would have more flexibility. But in the end, I ended up talking to recruiters with a baby in my arms. It was not fun. And then the next time I said, I'm not going to let this happen again. But it did. And that layoff was kind of interesting because I was working for a company that decided to declare bankruptcy. So at 5 o'clock, they called us all into a room and told us they were going to declare bankruptcy. And this manager and that manager were going to stay, and they were going to build a small crew to maintain the company's intellectual property through the bankruptcy. And I'd only been at that company for a year, so I didn't expect to stay. And I came in the next day and I was job hunting on the phone, using company resources, which everybody else was doing too. And my manager, who had been targeted to stay, came and said, would you come and talk to me in the conference room? And he said to me, I'd like you to stay if you want to. Do you want to? Which really surprised me, but pleasantly. And I said yes, because I figured having a job was better than not having a job. And that bankruptcy year was very interesting because what we had to do was to build a new plan to use the intellectual property of this company. It was almost like planning a startup, and then try to sell that to potential investors. So it was a very interesting year. Didn't exactly work out, but we all ended up with jobs at the next place. And the next place, I knew that this place was in trouble, but I thought I had a few months. And so I was going to give it a few months because the company was bidding on a contract from a very big tech company. And if we got that, then we would have new life in us. And I was pretty critical technically to winning and carrying out that contract. But again, politics intervened here. And the company did something completely irrational because they were like finalists for this contract. And we were about to go out and have a site visit with the company that was offering the contract, and they laid us all off. And then they tried to hire somebody back as a contractor to go to the site visit, but he said he wanted like $300 an hour, and they said no. So anyway, that was that. But I guess my point is, you never know when a layoff's going to hit, but you can ride through it and be successful. Okay, one last story on embrace failure. I found myself, so I was at EMC/Dell for almost 20 years. And there were certainly times in there where things were, a lot of change was happening. And I had thought I had positioned myself to go work for somebody that I really wanted to work for and would give me a nice solid base for the next stage of my career. And I woke up one day and a manager had decided that the guy that I was supposed to go work for, we had this agreement, and it was like all sort of in the cards, but not announced. They decided that he should have no direct reports. So that got cut off. And they had me report to somebody else. And the guy that I was supposed to work for said, don't worry, you're going to do the same work we were planning. I'm still going to advise you and direct you. I'll make it good with this other guy. But it didn't really work because the other guy wanted me to do the work that he wanted me to do, not the work that this, it was like a crazy situation. And so then they shuttled me off to yet another manager who was more in the area I was working in. So that part was good. But what happened in the midst of all this is nobody ever wrote me a review. And the third manager in this story, when it came to time for raises, he took, companies like allocate buckets of money. based on employees. And he took the money that should have been allocated to me and used it to give raises to people who worked for him longer. And I had nothing. I had no expectation of this happening. It wasn't like I'd gotten the review that said I needed improvement or something. It was very distressing. And my lesson from that is, if your management changes out from under you, make sure that you're telling the new manager what your expectations are, at least around raises and reviews and stuff like that. So let's go on to the next topic, which is ask for what you want. Now, this is really hard, but your manager doesn't read your mind. And also, if your manager is kind of different from you, like say a white male, they might be a little better at reading the minds of your white male colleagues than you. So it's really important to go out and ask for what you want. And my first story here is about a time at the very end of my career at Prime, my last year or so there. I had moved from the Primos operating system to working on a project that was Unix based, because that's the whole industry was moving away from proprietary operating systems. And I didn't have a lot of experience with Unix. My manager, all of his time was being taken up with external things, making contracts and working on things that were sort of external to the group. And we had a group of software engineers who were supposed to be doing work on the Unix operating system for this project, and there was nobody leading us. And my manager was intending to hire somebody with Unix operating system expertise to do this leadership role, but it wasn't happening. And so with some thought, I went to him on a Friday and I said, look, I have a lot of project leader experience. I'm a successful project leader. I am good at organizing people. I'm good at, helping people to stay focused and to keeping to schedules. The one thing I'm missing is this Unix experience, but I'm willing to be the project lead for this group of software people and make sure people are getting work done and know what they're supposed to be doing and so forth, as a temporary thing until you can find somebody to do the job that it's the person that you want. I'm just volunteering for this. And I really did this mostly out of my own self-interest, that I wanted us to be more organized and be getting things done when we were sort of in this period of being a little leaderless. And, I said to him, you're so busy with this other stuff, you can't do both of these jobs. And he said, I'll think about it and get back to you on Monday. And he came in on Monday and he said, you have the project leader job. It's not temporary. It's not fair to you to make it temporary. You just have the job, go and do it. So that was a very successful example. I got more than I wanted, actually, but it was a very successful example of asking for what you want. The next story is about wanting a promotion. And I was at a pretty high level when I came into EMC. The next level up, I actually came in as a manager, and then I decided I didn't want to manage. So I laterally moved to a pretty high technical level. The next level up technically was not well defined. It wasn't well defined what you had to do to get there. I mean, there was a level, but it was just kind of confusing. And I kept wanting to get a promotion. So with multiple managers, I said, I'd like to get a promotion. Please tell me what I need to do. Please work with me. And mostly I was like hitting my head against the wall with this. I had very good managers who kind of ignored this whole situation. So then what happened, and this story actually surprises me to this day. One of my peers was very interested in managing, and he got made a manager, and then I got assigned to work for him. And I really felt like this was going to be a hard situation for me, because this was a guy who had gotten a lot of credit for things that I felt like we had actually done together. And so, I had some feelings about that. And he was a brand new manager. But nevertheless, I said, okay, this is what it is. I have to make it work. I went to him and I gave him the same story that I had done with multiple other managers. I'd like a promotion. I'd like to know what I need to do to get there. Worked for him for the better part of a year, got to review time. He said, you're really close. you're on track to do the other things you need to do. Here they are. And I'm like, oh, this is actually working because he's a brand new manager and he wants to be a good manager. So it actually worked in my favor. And then he got transferred somewhere else and I got another manager. So I went to that manager and I said, look, here's the conversation I had with so-and-so. I really want this promotion. I just want you to know, he said I was close. This is my expectation. And my expectation was next review, I would get the promotion. What actually happened was I got an out of cycle promotion at 6 months. So I got the promotion. You know, not only do you have to ask for what you want, you may have to ask for what you want many, many times. Don't give up, just keep asking. Okay. 2 more stories. Well, 2 more points anyway. Salary, money. It's very hard for me. Very hard for many of us to ask for money. I've watched other people do it very successfully at the time that a job is offered. I made a different decision. My decision was so I worked for almost 10 years at Prime Computer. And when you work a long time in a company, your salary tends to get depressed next to the market because raises are smaller than jumps when you change jobs. But people shouldn't be discouraged. There's a lot of advantages to being a long time in a company. So when I moved jobs, I felt like my salary was probably a little depressed, but my take was, let me work for these people. Let me show them what I can do. Let me then ask them to be fair. And I did approach managers multiple times with about salary and say, I want to be paid what's fair compared to my other colleagues in terms of what they contribute, what they do, what they bring to the table. And I'm counting on you to ensure that this fairness happens. And this worked. I got raises, and sometimes it actually even happened when I wasn't even talking about it. The very last raise I got, I kind of think was a result of a lawsuit that was on the West Coast that I wasn't nearly a part of, but I can't even actually figure it out. I got a very big raise all of a sudden. That was a fairness. It was clearly an fairness adjustment. And then not too long after that, they laid me off. So I'm not sure if that was a good thing or not. But the point is, you have to ask for what you want, including money. And so here's my last, this is one of my favorite stories. So when I was working for this guy who kind of not given me the raise, I had a medical situation and I had to go out on medical leave for 6 weeks. While I was out on medical leave, my business unit was completely reorganized, the engineering part of it. They had 5 projects and they thought about every single person where they were going to fit best on these 5 projects. But they didn't think, I was a distinguished engineer. I was one of the most senior technical people in that organization. And yet I came back from leave and it didn't seem like they thought about me at all. I was still reporting to the same guy that wasn't a great fit, working on something that it didn't seem like was going to be going anywhere. It didn't seem like it was going to get any more funding. I'd done a certain amount of design. The design was done. It didn't look like the company was going to invest any more in this. So I come back from leave and I look at this and feel like, did they completely forget about me because I was gone for 6 weeks? What is this? There was a lot of reason to get upset, but I put a rein on that. And I said, I'm just going to get back, buckle down, show them what I can do, and then I'm going to ask about this. But that actually wasn't going to work either. And I ended up going to this the guy who was supposed to be my manager some years before that, in that other story, and telling him, I think I could really contribute to this one of these 5 projects. And I would like your help to get onto that project. And he said, okay, I will talk to the manager. I will raise to him that you have something to offer. Now that was step 1. Step two, the manager who was on the West Coast of that project that I wanted to get on came to the East Coast to talk. And after his talk, I went up to introduce myself because I knew that this other guy was going to raise me anyway. So I wanted him to see me. And one other person was talking to him, and I was standing waiting to talk to him. And just as he was finishing with that other person, a guy came up. He looked at me. He looked at the guy I was about to talk to, and he just butt in. And I was very brave. And I said, excuse me, I've been waiting to talk to so-and-so. I'm next. And I kind of like dismissed him and got in there. And I said, hello, I'm so-and-so. I'm very excited about your project. I'll follow up with an email. It was just a, something like that. And then I sent the email, and the email is very important too, because in the email, I didn't say, look at me, I'm so great. I can help you, hire me, bring me into your project. I said, this is who I am. This is what I have to offer. How can I help you? What can I do to help you be successful? And I think there's a subtle difference in those two approaches, but I think that was very important. So what happened was I got a part-time assignment to help with something on that project. And as soon as I started working on it, my value was recognized and I became a complete part of the project, a very big contributor to it, was very successful, except that the company decided not to spend any money selling it. And so it died. But anyway, but it was a really fun project. I was really happy to be on it. So I've listed a few other things here about things you can ask for, like asking for assignments that stretch you out of your comfort zone. I've talked about promotions. Ask for speaking and presentation opportunities because those will help move you forward. Attending conferences can help you, and classes or training or other development opportunities. This is a hard thing to do. Feel free to find a good friend and practice it. And as I already said, be persistent. Ask more than once. So just to wrap up here, these are some things that you can take away from here. I would urge you to think about these questions. Do you have ideas about yourself that might limit you? Think about what they are. Think about whether they're really true or whether you can actually overcome them. Don't limit yourself. Think of a failure you've experienced. What did you learn from it? Embrace it, learn it, and don't repeat it. And I know most of you are students, but as you go out into the work world, keep thinking about, is there something you want that you should ask for? Who do you need to ask? And go out and ask for what you want. So I'm ready to answer your questions. And I'll stop sharing so we can see each other again.
Thank you for that, Helen. Lots to think about. One thing I might ask you is with regard to visibility. With all the places you worked at and the managers you worked with, and you've also managed people. How do you address this issue of, for example, women need to be more visible about what they're doing, whereas, men are automatically assumed to be doing something. Is that an experience you've had? And if so, could you talk to that and the kinds of ways you overcome that? You might still be visible and doing things, but maybe women need to show that they're doing things.
Yeah. I think one thing that I was able to do at EMC was there was a technology council. And first I had to get myself invited to it. And I think actually before I got invited as a regular member, I made a couple presentations about projects I was doing. So you have to look at the particular situation, but see if there's some place where you can present, especially presenting to a group that is across the company. I remember the first time I went to present to this technology council, and there was a guy there that who I had known from sort of known from a previous company, the one that went bankrupt. he greeted me, said, "Oh, it's so wonderful to see a woman at this forum." And he was actually, he said it in a good way. It's like I felt very welcome, and I felt happy to be there, and I felt like I had an ally in the audience. I think another a sort of counter story about visibility. When I was working at a very small company, and there were two women engineers there. There was one who was a software engineer and one who was a hardware engineer. The other woman had red hair and was skinny. And I had, at the time, I had dark brown or black hair, and I wasn't so skinny. We were maybe around the same height. And her name was Ruth. And we would be in meetings and people would call her Ruth, or would call her Helen and call me Ruth. And it was just, and so that's an example of the invisibility. Right? We couldn't have been more different. But we did together kind of call people out on that. And I think another experience that you can have with invisibility is when you propose an idea in a meeting, and then maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, some guy proposes the idea and everybody says, "Oh, that's a really good idea." And one thing that help in that situation is to have an ally in the room who can say, "Oh yes, Helen talked about that 5 minutes ago." But even if you don't have an ally, you, instead of getting huffy and upset, you have to do this in the nicest possible way. And you can say, "Oh, Joe, thank you for bringing back up the idea I mentioned 5 minutes ago. I'm glad that you also think it's a good idea." You just have to, you have to be very brave. You can't just sit there and stew when these things happen. But you have to be very polite and very nice and very positive toward the person who might be doing you harm. And that seems to work. Did I answer your question, Kavita?
Yes, absolutely. I think these are subtle things that, for some of our students, it's not immediately obvious. And this is also true in the classroom setting and as they're going through their education here as well. But I'll open up the floor for questions. Go ahead. Comments or questions?
So I wanted to say thank you, Helen. I really did enjoy the talk. I think it's, I don't know, I guess it resonated. I don't know if that's over dramatic or something, but especially since I'm transitioning to a new phase in my life, with the PhD, I know there's a certain way you should carry yourself, especially if you're in a field where there's not a lot of women and women of color. So I was wondering, maybe 2 questions. How did you, I guess, build your confidence as an engineer? And how did you build your technical abilities?
It's a really good question. I think for me, confidence was less of an issue than I was always a pretty assertive person. So people respond negatively to that sometimes. So I needed to figure out ways to not be off-putting emotionally. But there, I think, for instance, well, I do think of an example. I did presentations at user group meetings. And when I first started doing that, it was pretty scary. I mean, you're in a room with 100 or 200 people in the front of the room, and you want to be really engaging. The last thing you want to be is like quiet and monotonic. And so I practiced in front of a mirror. I practiced over and over and over again so I could be really smooth. And that does build your confidence. for when you're doing public speaking, and you can use that technique even in a smaller sense if you're going to propose an idea in a meeting or whatever. I think writing things down and working on making it succinct is good. We did a workshop around elevator pitches. I think this is a good thing to do, to create a 30 to 90 second statement about who you are and really practice on making that very succinct. And you know, I had in my elevator pitch, I say, I like solving problems, I like working with people, and I like building things for people to use. And those are 3 qualities which are really important in a software engineer. And that's why I've been a successful software engineer, something like that. But you see, it's very pointed and very specific and very much about me, but also makes a point. Oh, and then I had another sentence about, and that led me to like however many patents I had at that point. It wasn't up to 60 yet when I wrote that. Let's see. I think having a mentor or having a sponsor, which are slightly different things, can be another way of building confidence. I think working with a mentor the mentor can help you with building confidence. So not every piece of advice I can give you right now, but you know, or have like a scenario. I'm not sure if I've completely answered it.
Sorry, you're I think Zoom kind of froze.
Oh.
But yes, I believe you did answer my question. I did have another question about building technical abilities, but you can answer that. Oh.
Right. Okay. Sorry. So I think it's always hard when you're starting on something new or different. It's always good if you can find somebody to consult with. These days, you know, there's all these user boards and places you can go, you know, ask questions and get answers. And I think when you do something successfully, then that builds up a little more confidence. So as I was talking about learning from your experiences in the soft skills, I think that also works on the technical side. I like working in teams. I think much better work comes out of a team than out of an individual. So if you can find a good teammate, I think that can help to build your technical skills, because you'll learn from what they know and they'll learn from what you know, and what you know together will be much bigger than the sum of the parts.
Thank you.
Hey,
Nathan?
Helen. Yeah, great presentation. Thank you so much. I had some questions about how you demonstrated your previous experience to employers, especially because you had some stories about situations where things didn't really give you a chance to show your skills because of circumstances that were like less than ideal, like the political stuff that you talked about or whatever. How do you talk about those projects to employers, or do you talk about those projects to employers where like it didn't get off the ground for XYZ reason, or I was taken off the project for XYZ reason,
Yeah.
but like it still shows what you know?
That's a really good question, Nathan, because I have found that more often than not, projects don't succeed. The amazing thing about that last project that I talked about was it was a group of, it was several different groups of people who come from different places that came together and successfully built an amazing product that was built to meet a specific need that was well described, and we met that. So to me, it felt like a success. I mean, we wanted, one of the things of this product was it should be pretty much self-installable. You didn't want to have send an expert out to, a lot of the products I worked on, you needed experts to come in and install them and maintain them and so forth. So this was kind of different for this company, and it clearly worked because we handed it off to people and they were able to do it.
Yeah, nice.
So I think you can focus on what was successful about what you did, even when the overall product might have failed for reasons that were completely beyond your control.
Okay, nice. Thank you.
And I would also urge you to think about what are the problems that you successfully solve? People are looking for problem solvers. So you can illustrate that even in something that, fell off the truck, so to speak. And really, I think employers ought to understand that most things in this industry don't succeed, and that people still get valuable experiences and learn things from doing them.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Anyone else? I don't bite.
Hello, anybody else? Let's have some provocative questions. Let's.
I'll go. Yeah. I wanted to know about, in the course of your career, I understand that you've changed a lot of jobs. That's what I think. I wanted to know how that has really affected or impacted in your career over the years, or how it really, I don't know if it had a positive impact or a negative one. Just, I just wanted to know about that. Thank you.
So I did change jobs, especially either because I was not happy with the story I told about the physical sciences laboratory, or because I was laid off. And being laid off doesn't usually have a negative impact on you. It depends on what else is going on. I mean, during a time when lots of people are being laid off, then it is harder to find a job, and you may not have so much choice. And then if you just wait between a few months and a couple of years, the environment will usually change and the jobs will open up. But my last job I was at for almost 20 years, which is half my career. So I sometimes think I should have changed jobs more often. I think if you change jobs a lot, you need to put a positive story behind it, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And if you don't change jobs a lot, you also might need to put a story behind it.
Okay.
I also, it's interesting because I didn't mention this, but my last 3 jobs, I worked for I started out at least working for the same person. So sometimes you find somebody that you really get along with and it works out well. That I was describing that job where there was an unexpected layoff where we had this contract and I thought we would at least last till we saw that we didn't get the contract. My manager, who had been my manager at my last 2 places, he had left that job 3 weeks before they laid me off. So the first person I called, he left and he could not raid us because he'd left. But once we were laid off, he could. So I called him and I had an interview the next day. And that was a very lucky circumstance and led to a very interesting half of my career, actually. So, but keep your contacts keep keep your contacts fresh. That would be a piece of advice I'd have. And yeah. Anyone else?
I would just ask, over your 40-year career, compared to when you started and maybe just before you left, what has changed? What do you think has been the most fundamental change for women in technology with respect to the culture of the environment or other attributes or aspects?
Part of me wants to say nothing's changed. Well, I don't think that's really true. But when when I was in grad school, so this was 79 to 81, you could still go into computer science from any field. My undergraduate degree is in chemistry, and I did some work in biology in between, and I would say close to half half the people in my grad school class were women, but none of the faculty were.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certainly a lot more women faculty around the country and at University of Wisconsin-Madison. But I think the number of women in grad school has gone down. And I've been involved in conversations, especially when I've gone back to Madison, but about why it's so hard to attract women into computer science. And I think there's still a real need to lift up both women and minorities in STEM fields. I think that's clear, even though there's more faculty, there's more people. What I found in industry, so when I went to Prime, I was among, there were no women in that operating system group when I interviewed there, but by the time I got there, there were several. But throughout my career, there have been many times when I was the only woman in a group. And a lot of technical women went into a management path instead of in a technical path. I think it's still a much harder path for women to go to move in a technical path. And I was one of 4 or maybe 5 distinguished engineers who were women in the whole time I was at EMC. And one after another, we were laid off. Now, male distinguished engineers were laid off too, so I don't want to, but there's still a long way to come, I think.
But I guess the question is, so if more women went into the managerial ladder and you had more women who had the sort of the decision-making, capability, did that influence a change in the dynamic in any way?
Yeah, I don't think women always help women. I mean, I think it's an unfortunate thing, but it's first of all, the milieu of the society affects all of us. And most of my career, I tried to ignore the fact that I was a woman. I tried not to blame things on the fact that I was a woman, because I felt like I'm not going to do an anti-discrimination lawsuit. So what is the point?
Right.
I just have to live with the situation as it is and do my best. And yeah, probably, maybe I have to work harder and get paid less. And that's just, I still really enjoyed my career. I feel like I accomplished a lot. I'm very proud of everything from my 60 patents, the distinguished engineer, but I'm really interested in just helping women and minorities to be more successful in the STEM field. And I think some of the lessons that I talked about today are useful for, like asking for what you want, I think is critical, because they're going to give the white guys what they want, because that's just the way it is. The people, that's how people, it is how it is. But if you make yourself noisy, if you make yourself a squeaky wheel, you can get that some of that attention, and then just don't give up. Just keep asking, and go out and do things. Volunteer to do things that show what you have to contribute. Don't hang back. You can't hang back.
Yeah. And I think for all these young people to know also that exactly what you're doing, that come back, not only just come back after you retire, but really go out there and speak to others about what you need to do that has worked for you or not worked for you, and sort of have that conversation. So the younger generation are continuously hearing this, and they also become advocates in the future, right? I think that's key in some ways.
Right. And there are a lot of data that shows that companies that are successfully diverse are more successful. So there are strong business reasons for things to change.
Yeah.
But there was one woman on the board of EMC who fostered a lot of programs for women, and I benefited from those programs. And I think she alone had a really big impact. So it's important actually to put yourself out there, get on boards. So
okay, well, thank you, Helen. If there are no other questions or comments, shall we thank our speaker from our Zoom locations?
Thank you.
Thank you very
Helen.
much.
thank you. And
Hopefully we'll have you here in person at some point in time later this year for really a more interactive discussion. I know you wanted to do that with breakout rooms and stuff, but probably better in person.
what I've done when I've done this in person and had the time is at the end of each section stop and ask people to pair up and talk about, do they have a limiting idea about themselves? So I would encourage you to take those three. I don't know if Ariel distributed the handout that I did, but
I'll send that out to all of the registrants. Yes.
it has those three questions on it, and really just pair up and go through them and share with each other. I think that helps to solidify the lessons a little. Yep. And I hope you all have fabulous careers.